Hey everyone, and welcome to the Tom's Hardware Show. I'm your host, Sharon Harding, and today we're hanging out with Wooting Keyboards Calder Limmen and checking out Razer's brand new gaming mouse, the Basilisk V3. Thank you everyone for joining our live stream. If you're watching this actually live, we are taking questions from the audience as always. So if you have anything you'd like to ask, just drop it into the chat wherever you're watching this, Facebook, Twitch, YouTube, and we'll try to discuss it live on air. So joining me today, we have Tom's Hardware staff writer and show favorite, Michelle Earhart. What's up, Michelle?
Hey Sharon, not much. How are you?
Doing well, glad to have you. And I'm also super thrilled to welcome Wooting CEO and co-founder, Calder Limmen. How are you, Calder?
I'm doing good, thanks.
Glad to have you. So yeah, for those who don't know Wooting, how would you explain what you guys do in a sentence or two?
We make analog input keyboards, and if you would want me to be a bit more a bit more visionary, let's put it that way about it, then it's basically us together with you, the people interested in us, making impactful products and changing the industry by analog input keyboards.
Very cool. I like it. So analog keyboards, that's what you're focusing on. Do you have anything that you can show our viewers now to give them, a taste of what Wooting's all about?
Well, I do. I am using the new 60% keyboard that we're going to bring out this month at the moment. But obviously, to showcase exactly what happens on our keyboards, what makes our keyboards different and special, requires a much bigger showcase. But this is the 60% keyboard that we're going to bring out. We're going to launch it this month in pre-orders. I need to press it down here because it is an actual 60% that you can also install into other 60% cases. So this is what we call the module. And this you can install to in other cases. And here you can see this is the case that we give with the keyboard. It has foam inside for all those nice typing feels. And is also compatible for other 60% modules.
That's super cool. So you can get that on pre-order now, and when does it come out or ship out?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's launching in pre-order by the end of this month. We don't have a final date, but there is a webpage. You can just Google Wooting 60 HE. You already get to the webpage and subscribe there, and then you'll get a notification when it goes live. And we'll notify you a week before with all the details when we do. We're working really hard right now to get the launch going. So expect it it should be on the 28th of September. I'm just not allowed to say it, but I'm going to say
it. Exclusive.
Exclusive, yeah.
That's really interesting that you can take it and put it into a different 60% case. Is that I don't believe that's something you can do with your other keyboards, right?
So there is this, we call it the universal 60% case. So there is like a standard for 60% keyboards that you'll see other 60% keyboards also using. I get also this foam. Yeah, okay. If you can see here, you see that there is a couple of shiny parts here, which are metal threads. And these are the screw-in points for what we call the module, but basically for the PCBA screw-in points. And there are other 60% cases that have these exact, and one more, there's a hole over there, screw-in points. And then you can just, with also the same USB-C port, you can just put the PCBA into the plate and screw it in. And that way you can use it with other 60% PCBAs. And this is what we call the universal 60%. So we have most popular one with the same format as the poker keyboards, but you also have cases from KBD fans, aluminum cases, which are pretty affordable. And that way you can just, in that way, and what is very important for us is we are able to give you our analog technology in a 60% format, but you still have some freedom to choose your own case or modify the case to something like an aluminum case. And you're not limited anymore to what we provide you.
right.
Do you sell like cases on their own? Because you mentioned like putting it in the case for other keyboards. Can I like buy the modular bit and then a case separately?
Yeah, it's a good question, Michelle, because we were originally planning to sell the case separate
Ooh,
in
okay.
black and white, but we learned a lot along the way that economically, looking at it economically, it just became a very expensive trick to do it. The case itself, to offer the case itself in black and white would mean that would need a lot more packaging. It would also mean that there's a lot more admin fees involved, and it just made the whole thing more expensive, which is kind of against the idea that we had for the 60%. So we killed that off, and we decided it's just better to just give the case with the module together, like a fully assembled 60%. And then if you want to modify it, you modify it. And if you don't want to, you keep it as it is. So unfortunately, not yet, not at this moment, but we will consider to, for example, release other color cases where you can swap it out for.
Awesome.
So
That makes sense.
we have a question from Miles Goldman. Hi, Miles. They're asking if there are plate-mounted stabilizers on the keyboard.
Yes. Oh my gosh, good questions, because plate mount stabilizers are pretty awesome. It really depends on what you get also. And it was a really big consideration for us to add it. It was a big discussion, but there's some really big disadvantages of using plate mount stabs, starting off with that right now, the PCB of the keyboard, it's one PCB no matter what language layout we use. If you divide it between ISO and ANSI, we can use the same PCB. Just the parts assembled on the PCB that you see here are different for ISO and ANSI. But if we start using screw-in stabs, we would need to add extra holes in the PCB, and that would interfere with either the ANSI or the ISO layout. Therefore, we would have to separate the PCB, which would also increase manufacturing costs and a lot of hassle. So that was one factor. The second factor is that right now, the availability of screw-in stabs for mass-producing a keyboard, let's say mass-producing a gaming keyboard and making it affordable is very low. And if one of these suppliers that usually don't supply in big quantities are not able to supply, it's a big problem because there's not an alternative, right? That's around the corner. So we decided it's safer and better to just keep it with the plate-mounted stabs.
Very cool. So I want to talk a little bit about analog keyboards in general. And just for anyone who, might not know what we mean or maybe calls it by a different name, just real quick, I usually describe it as kind of just like pressure sensitive switches. And yeah, correct me if you have a better way of explaining.
I can take over from you, but I would love to hear your explanation.
Okay, this is what I normally tell people. So pressure sensitive, and it's really good for something like a driving game where the harder you press it, the faster you'll go. That's my short summary. That's
a good summary, because usually when you talk, it depends on which audience you talk. In the general audience, especially a bit more outside of gaming, the easiest is just how you just explained it, because that can make the relationship between having gradual inputs. Because for this audience also, they don't even know what an actuation they don't know what an actuation point is. They don't understand how mechanical switches really work, that there's a travel distance and you can do something with that. But then assuming the audience has a bit more knowledge, then the core technology and what we do is that we have basically mechanical switches. In this case, we have contactless mechanical switches. I'm going to rip it out of the keyboard now. Wow. Okay. Here I have it. So we have contactless mechanical switches that have a magnet here in the center. And this is never going to, it's going to focus. Whoa, that's incredible. Okay. So it has a magnet here in the bottom. And this magnet is very important because when you we can just pop in the switch, and then we can just, with a sensor in the PCB, sense this magnet. And you can see let me just put it in front of my face again. As I press the stem of the switch, you can see the magnet moving downwards. And we can sense the proximity of the magnet towards the bottom, or towards the sensors, which is on the bottom. And because we can sense the proximity, we can basically see how far down you're pressing a key. And that would be your pressure sensitive analogy. So in that way, we're basically measuring the distance you're pressing the key. And by measuring that, we can do a lot of different things. And the most simple one for anybody that uses mechanical keyboards is adjusting the activation point. So that would mean this has a 4 millimeter travel. And the question is, when during this travel does the key actually go on? Usually a switch only goes on like halfway to press. But with us, you can decide, does it go on straight at 0.1 millimeters, which is basically this? Yeah, you didn't see it because it's that little. Or you can put it all the way at the end, which is all the way at 4 millimeters and anywhere in between. And that would be a very quick way of using analog input in a traditional way. But we push it up to we bring it all the way up to the point where you can also control in-game movement. And that would mean similar to joysticks on a controller, you can control a steering wheel, for example, gradually to the left or to the right. But if you do that on a keyboard, it usually just the steering wheel doesn't fly all the way, but you press the key and then they add a little delay so the steering wheel goes slow, but you have no control. But in the end, it's all the way at the end. So you end up tapping on your keyboard. But then with our keyboard, you'd basically be able to you are able to control the steering wheel gradually, depending on where and how far down you've pressed the key. And that would also be able to do with movement, and you would be able to you can do it with flying and there's different applications for different games and how you can use it.
So a game has to support analog input, right, in order for you to take advantage of that, a PC game?
So that's the tricky part, because it's not, at this moment, games don't know what is an analog input keyboard in general, but they do know what is an Xbox controller, what is a flight stick, and what is a generic gamepad. So what we basically do is we tell the computer, look, this is an Xbox controller, and this is a gamepad, and on WASD it's a left joystick, and we just mimic all the controller outputs to the PC, and in that way the game will also recognize, it will think you have a controller plugged in, and you're controlling all the in-game character or vehicles, whatever it might be, with a controller, but in reality you're doing it with the keyboard. Now, that still doesn't mean that you can use it with any game in every game, because there's this problem where some game developers, they think they're smart, and when they detect a gamepad, they'll disable your mouse and keyboard input because they figure you're not going to use a mouse and a keyboard when you're playing the game. But in our situation, when we're playing the game, we're using a keyboard and a mouse still, and also a gamepad at the same time, and it doesn't always play well together. So it's really game dependent on how well you can use that functionality. But that obviously doesn't stop us from doing our best to add more compatibility. And you can also see that in game development, there's more and more cross-platform games. And with cross-platform also comes better support for different devices and also simultaneous use of devices. And there are a couple of games that do that pretty well, such as Fortnite, and still one of the best ones, Overwatch, that support simultaneous use of different devices at the same time.
I'm curious what you think, Michelle, because if I'm not mistaken, you sometimes use controllers for PC games?
So I like to use my PC to like play shooters and strategy games and all the traditional things, but like, character action games, platformers, that stuff are releasing on PC as well now. So I'll often use a controller for that because I just feel like it's more natural for that sort of thing. And one of the things that I do miss when I play like a shooter or a game that I do like to play with keyboard and mouse is the ability to like walk by just slightly tilting the stick. because it can't tell, when I press W whether I want to walk or run. Normally that's just an aesthetic choice, but like say a game like Final Fantasy 14, which has a lot of like AoE markers and stuff that you
Oh,
need
yeah.
to make precise movement around. Sometimes that can be important for gameplay. So the idea of the analog keyboard does interest me. The one thing that I'm curious about that you mentioned is like being able to trick the games into picking in the up the input like a controller. Does that put like a maximum amount of buttons that I can map? Because a controller has fewer buttons than a keyboard. And then also, how do the buttons show up in the menu? Like if I map a button to the B key on my keyboard, does that show up as like left bumper on the in-game menu?
Yes. So these are good questions, because these are exactly the things that you'd be dealing with. First of all, is that when you connect the keyboard to the game and you start playing the game, the first thing you'll notice is that the UI might switch with its tool. It's the UI tooltips will start switching around between, oh, do you want to press this controller button, or to, I don't know, to jump, press this controller button, or you see some item and it shows like a tooltip which button to press or something, and you'll see like a gamepad button and not your keyboard button. So there's this UI part about it, and the way you map it on the keyboard is that you basically have an overview of all the gamepad buttons, like all the, let's say, an Xbox controller or a PS4 controller is like a legacy controller. Xbox controller is a little bit easier. You have all the Xbox controller buttons, and you can just click, drag, and drop them wherever you want on the keyboard. And by using our other feature, you can also duplicate these controller buttons over multiple keys. So you could have you can have left joystick on WASD, but you can also have left joystick on the arrow keys. You can have it over O, KL, double dot, whatever. You can map it anywhere you want. And as far as the game goes, it really depends on if you still use the keyboard keys or not. When you press the key, let's say you have left joystick on WASD, the PC will both simultaneously see your keyboard key A or W or S or D, and it will see the left joystick at the same time. And then we get back to the UI part. That's where it gets sometimes tricky with certain games. It will either start changing a lot between the UI of, are you pressing you're pressing the keyboard key, oh, you're pressing the gamepad key, and it starts switching around the UI. But games with good support, they will have a menu option where they'll allow you to force one certain UI interface. And Overwatch and Fortnite does that very well, for example. And then there's also ways of avoiding it by how you set up your keyboard by what you could also do is disable the WASD keyboard keys and only have the left joystick outputting.
Okay. The one question that raised for me, I guess, is like if I'm tricking the game into seeing my keyboard as a controller, and suddenly I want to type something in the chat, like if I'm in Overwatch or something, can I quickly, swap to keyboard control to do that?
Yeah, so with Overwatch, it's really game dependent. So with Overwatch, if you'd open up the chat, it really depends on what happens with left joystick for that game. So in some cases in chat, left joystick will kind of work as a arrow key, meaning that it will move to a certain, will move if you press the A key, and it's also pressing the left joystick, which in that game might be moving one to the left, one letter to the left. But for another game, you might be typing, and I think that also happens in Overwatch, and your character starts moving a little bit. But nothing happens with your chat itself. But it starts moving a little bit because it sees the joystick moving at the same time. But regardless, this is why we invented the mode button. So our keyboards, you're able to map the mode button anywhere you want on the keyboard. But we always designate one key for the mode button. And that mode button basically switches you back to what we call digital profile, which is like keyboard only profile. And then you can just use it as a regular keyboard, no analog gamepad interfaces. and then you press mode again, and it switches back to your last used profile, which is usually the profile you're using in that game. So you can quickly switch in between.
Okay, awesome. One more question, if that's okay. So if my keyboard is emulating or is switching the game to operate in controller mode, does that affect mouse input at all? Like, is my mouse emulating a right stick, or is it going to like work exactly like a mouse normally would?
You know your you know
Sorry.
your inputs. Yeah, no, it's I like the question. It's really I'm glad to receive these kind of questions because they're the right kind of questions to ask also. So the keyboard is seen as a gamepad, and it's not by software on your PC. It is literally a gamepad. So you can connect it to anywhere, and it will also be seen as a gamepad. I mean, as a keyboard and a gamepad, but it will also be seen as a gamepad. What that also means is that the mouse is not part of that same device, so it can't suddenly take over other buttons of that same gamepad. So that is a separate thing now. But if you'd want to combine the two, where you have keyboard inputs, analog keyboard inputs, and you have the, let's say, right joystick on your mouse movement, you would need to use PC software. Now, we don't do that particular part with PC software because there are other alternatives, such as ReadWASD. And this is like a great software program which can allows you to connect whatever gamepad you want and then consolidate that into one gamepad output on your PC. And it basically emulates the controller. You can use our keyboard as a gamepad, and then you can use your mouse as a gamepad, and simulate controller movements with the controller emulator. But in our situation, that's not the case. And it's really game dependent on what happens when you use a gamepad and a mouse at the same time. So to give you a good example, obviously with the games I mentioned before, nothing happens, or maybe there's the UI interface change with certain games. But when it doesn't work well, is a game such as Rainbow Six, which is a real shame. You can move around with the joystick on the keyboard. You can move around with the mouse. You can do everything, and it looks great. You think it's going great until you try to shoot, and it blocks you. It doesn't accept mouse clicks, and they probably do this to prevent people from exploiting auto aim that you usually get on controllers.
Right.
See, Michelle, I told you is a show favorite because she comes with the good questions.
Oh
Hold it.
gosh.
So we have a question from Confused Council. What about macros, he asks. How does the analog impact use of macros? Hate not to get the heels out in time. That's important.
Nice.
You only got a little bit of time.
So we actually have a different take on macros. I first do have to say that at this moment, we don't have like a full macro suite that you would find with other keyboards. And we usually just say, if you really want to get the most out of macros, go use a software like Auto Hotkey, because that can really do a lot. And we basically say that because we are kind of avoiding to do the development on something that is very, it exists there and it's very saturated, and we cannot really add that much more value at this point. But we are working on it. We are going to add a full macro system into our own software, and that can be saved on the keyboard. But then the part that, what is our take on macros and what do we do? So what we do have when it comes to macros is something very unique. And this is what we love spending much more time on. And it's called dynamic keystroke. And with dynamic keystroke, basically, in its current version, we have 4 activation points over the switch, and in each activation point you can activate something else. And to keep it very simple, what we've done now is at the start of the press you can activate something, at the end of the press you can activate something, when you release the end of the press you can activate something, and when you release the entire key you can activate something. But during that movement of activating things, it's not linear one way. You can also go back. So what you could do is you can press all the way to the end, activate that certain end action, release it, activate the release action, but then go back down again and activate that end action again. And then in Confused Council's example, when you use it for MMORPGs and you have like a certain macro for timing things, and now you can time things by your own. So you don't press one button and there's like a sequence of button actions happening with certain timings. But now you press the button, the first action happened. You can time when is that perfect moment you need to throw that heal out or do that recovery spell, whatever it might be, or do that extra buff, right? Made me think about Guilders for a moment, sorry. But now you can time it by depending on how far down you press the key. And that's what we call dynamic keystroke.
Oh, it seems like we lost Sharon for a moment.
She's muted.
Here I am. So very cool. I see we have a question from ArtCal2000. They noticed that the Wooting One is sold out forever, according to the site. They're a fan of Tequila. So you did just mention the Wooting 60 HE is going to hit pre-order this month. I do have this full-size Wooting Two HE that I believe pre-orders are open now.
Yeah, so I'll give some little bit background, some context to the reasons. So when we just started Wooting, we started with infrared technology using flare tech switches. And that worked great until the point that it didn't work great. And that was the point where we really felt like we really want to make a step forward. The infrared technology was still limited in the range it could read and the stability of the signal. It just could be a lot better. And that's when we decided, okay, we're going to move over to magnet switches, which are Hall effect switches. And that move was a very big move to make. And that pushed us back a lot in development, up to the point where by the time that we finished the first full-size keyboard, which is the Wooting Two Lacquer Edition with these Hall effect switches, we already didn't produce the Wooting One or Wooting Two with the infrared switches anymore. And we just sold out. We sold the stock that we still had. And now, even after we delivered the Wooting Two Lacquer Edition, which is the first version with the magnet switches inside, that was a limited edition, and we still wanted to make some changes to the keyboard to make it a little bit better. And that is the Wooting Two HE, and that's what Sharon has in her hands or showed you before. And the Wooting Two HE, because of the whole IC market also and long lead times, it's taken a while to get all the components together to do the productions. So it's a long story, which we all publish on the blogs, which you can read back if you're interested. But now that keyboard, we received it recently. We delivered it for everybody in batch one. And now there's still another batch going into production on the 22nd of September. And that's the batch you can pre-order right now. And if you get air freight shipping, you can receive that by mid-October. And if you go for regular shipping, it will ship in November. So that would be Wooting Two HE.
Cool.
Gotcha.
So thank you everyone for all the questions. Keep them coming. Calder is going to hang out with us for the rest of the show, and there's some conversations going on in the chat as well. So definitely keep the questions coming. In the meantime,
sorry, I just thought of something. Is to concretely directly answer the question of why then the Wooting One is not available anymore.
Yeah,
it's for us to make the conversion between to convert the original Wooting One to be compatible with the new technology. And also it means we need to make a lot of changes to the case, and it's just not worth it to us to make those changes. So we decided to just leave it out, unlike what we did with the Wooting Two. And instead we decided to invest all that into a new keyboard, which is a 60% keyboard, which is the Wooting 60 HE. And that one is going in pre-order at the end of this month. I said 28th of September before, so I'll keep it to 28th September.
all right. Well, Manson, though, wants to know about a TKL. 10 kilos.
Right, so that's exactly, yep.
Okay. Very
So is
cool.
there
That's
like
exactly
a 100% TKL in the works, I guess, to replace the Wooting one?
So right now we're not working on the TKL version, and we've decided to just focus right now. We have a full size version which caters to a different audience, and we have our 60% version which caters to a more competitive audience. I haven't even talked about input speed. Oh gosh.
I actually have one more question about this keyboard before we move on. Is I see you have this neat little like wristband off the case. Is
Yes.
that custom or
Yeah.
does that come with the case?
That's very cute. I
This
do like that.
This one comes with the case. And
Okay.
so you get the keyboard with what we call the strap. And this here we call the attachment. These are internal words. We didn't think about it for marketing purposes. So, so basically what you can do, this is what's called the Chicago screw. You can just like unscrew these two, and then it just comes apart. And you can either clip something yourself on the clip, or you can add something you want on this clip on the side, or you can just use our attachment here and just poke it through something with two holes, or a keychain, whatever you want to do, and then you
Yeah, I
can
can't wait
personalize
to
the
be
keyboard.
the coolest kid at the LAN party coming in
Yeah,
with my keyboard. Yeah.
right. And yeah, and well, there is some people. Our audience has a bit more of something. You add something, it needs to have a purpose or some kind of technical function. It's not there. It just really looks nice.
I want a wristlet to wear to like weddings that looks like that keyboard, but it opens up and I can keep my lip balm and stuff like that in there. But one thing at a time for Wooting. So like I said, keep the questions coming, where there's a lot of conversation going on in the chat and we still got Calder here with us. In the meantime, like I said, I do want to show you all something. I did just test a brand new gaming mouse from Razer and I actually really liked it. So we should check it out, I think. So let me just adjust my camera here and bring this up, and here we go. So this is what I have for you all. This mouse came out yesterday. It's the Razer Basilisk V3. So yes, it is the third iteration of Razer's Basilisk mouse. If you're familiar with Razer, you know they have a lot of mice, actually. Lots of different lines, different versions within each lineup. So the Basilisk line, I'd say, is more versatile, partially because you have 9 programmable buttons here. So 1, 2, left, right click, 3 side buttons here, including a sniper button that drops CPI really low, so you can do a quick headshot or something like that. 2 buttons south of the scroll wheel, and then 1 on the mouse's underside here. But actually, the scroll wheel has 5 programmable inputs. You can control what happens if you scroll it up, down, left, right, and also in. So just a lot of programmability here. But one of the big features here, especially compared to the Basilisk V2, the predecessor, the prior Basilisk mouse, is actually in the scroll wheel. So I'll try to get it to focus. But basically, the wheel can either have a tactile spin, where it scrolls line by line, like a ratchet movement, or it could spin freely, where it just keeps scrolling and scrolling.
I love that feature whenever I see it.
Yeah, so you can swap it with a click, or you could program a button to change the modes. Or what's actually new here is it could change automatically. So I have it in tactile now, and when I flick it, it'll start spinning freely because I have it set like that. The one thing is it makes it kind of loud. I don't know if you can hear it. Here, I'm going to bring it to the mic here. That's the tactile, and every time you switch modes, there's a clicking noise. I don't know if you can hear that.
Yeah, we can hear that.
Very clearly,
But
yeah.
I hear, and it annoys me. So I actually don't like the auto mode switch because that noise happens frequently and it annoys me. Also, the wheel can be a little wobbly, as here. You can see it shifting from left to right if I
That's
force
not
it.
a horizontal press.
No, it can go that way, but right now it's just
It won't register.
It's just wobbling right now. But if I push
Gotcha.
it further, that's an input.
Oh, okay.
So that's not normally a problem, but if when I was like gaming and moving like super fast left to right specifically, I could feel the wheel shifting. So that is that also annoyed me as well. But things that don't annoy me. 11 programmable RGB zones. That probably does annoy some of you out there, but there's a lot of RGB here. So the scroll wheel is a zone, the Palm logo here, and then there's 9 on the bottom. Here, you can get a look at that. Also, 5 onboard memory profiles. It's just really like a premium feature heavy mouse. But the last thing I'll highlight here is just the texture of the mouse. It's actually something I really enjoyed. If I could get it, if you look really closely, it's kind of more textured. There's a light texture here that just makes the plastic feel more premium than a lot of gaming mice, like a Razer Death Adder, for example, that uses ultra lightweight plastic that like helps the mouse weigh a little bit so you could fling it about easily, but it just doesn't feel as like premium as you'd expect, especially when Razer mice are kind of expensive. And then also the grip, the sides are textured even like differently. I'm trying to get in focus, but it's like indentations, tiny little bumps on the sides. So it's just a really good grip and a good size for me, at least for palm gripping and also claw gripping. So you can get this mouse right now if you want for $70. But maybe you want to hear what our esteemed guests have to say or think about the mouse first. Michelle, I'll start with you. What do you think about the Basilisk V3?
I used to have a Logitech mouse with that scroll wheel function. I don't know what happened to it. I think eventually the scroll wheel broke, which made me very sad because I really love that function. And I'd be excited to have it again if I got this mouse. Just hopefully it wouldn't break this time. All the RGB is definitely the first thing I noticed about it. I wouldn't expect like 9 zones across that one strip on the bottom. I'm not sure exactly how you like distribute those. I was kind of confused by the wobbliness of the scroll wheel, I guess. Like when I saw that, I thought you were pushing it all the way in for an input, but I guess that's just how it works. Um, I'm not sure whether like does the texture make it feel better than other Razer mice or worse?
I personally think it makes it feel better. Like for one, it feels more expensive because it's a $70 mouse. And a lot of times I pick up these, not like the honeycomb, but like a Razer Death Adder. Again, I'll use an example. Just a lot of mice that advertise itself as lightweight. The plastic is just like smoother and it just feels like a cheap mouse. Like when you pick it up, you're like, oh, I didn't expect it to feel like it feels like a $20 mouse. But more importantly, the texture gave me a better grip. So my hands weren't getting as clammy and I can just get a really good grip on the mouse. But Calder, what do you think?
Well, some people notice about me is that I'm always surprised how people are so how people are accepting the current state of scroll wheels on mice. Because to be honest, even for this scroll wheel, I can assure you that maybe in 4 months or 6 months, it's going to be defect, or it's going to skip, or it's going to have some kind of issue. And I find with every mouse that I've had until so far, the scroll wheel just breaks after a while, short while. And I'm always surprised I don't hear it a little bit more. And people are just accepting it and saying like, yeah, but like Michelle mentioned before, something happened with the scroll wheel. Like it's totally normal. The scroll wheel breaks on my mouse, just get a new one. And I think that's that's a really bad situation for mice. And even when you go to these lightweight mice, for example, and in the higher segment, they'll still use very cheap scroll wheel technology, and so that's a big focus point for me, which annoys me. Then, other than that, I mean, the mouse itself, I'm wondering what audience it's catering for, because I feel that has to be an older segment, because a younger population, anybody below 25 years old, is not really going to be very interested in this kind of mouse anymore. But that maybe it's a certain country, I wouldn't know. But the amount of RGB, the larger shape, the weight, I think it's not the kind of mouse you'd be looking for right now. And then the scroll wheel function, it's nice to have that between, I do a bit of gaming, I do a bit of productivity. But there again, it's 25 years or older, and that those kind of people would want that. If you want a gaming mouse, you're not using it for productivity as well at the same time. So I think it's not the mouse for the market now. That
Ooh, hot take.
Okay. So here's what I could say about the scroll wheel. We'll start there. And I see a bunch of comments mentioning that, and Michelle, you mentioned this, that Logitech has a similar technology. So yeah, Logitech does have a similar, and I would say better technology that they're using nowadays. I can't remember exactly what the wheel's made out of. I want to say titanium. It's made out of some sort of metal where it just feels way more solid. Changing modes isn't loud. It just feels much smoother and less rattly altogether. So yeah, I totally agree there. The mouse has, at least in the US, the mouse has a 2-year warranty. So that's something to keep in mind. And in terms of, the market, I agree with you. That's something I wrote in my review. It has a sniper button, which has implications obviously for shooters. But it's not, and it's not like a lot of the mice for shooters are super, super light. This is not, and it's like you said, bigger. And yeah, people over 25 like me, I actually did like that because I'm more used to it, and I actually did use it for both productivity and work, which is why I say it's versatile. So yeah, if you don't want it for productivity also, which I think you might because it is $70. But if you don't, then yeah, it does get kind of bulky. But I like that it was kind of versatile in that way. And I will say that the PTFE feet on the bottom do help it glide a little bit better than you might expect from looking at it. And I also found that the thumb paddle here gave me like a way to anchor myself and push the mouse, which also helped make movements a little bit better. So what I will do real quick is drop my link to the review, Tom's Hardware review, in the chat, so you can check that out. But in the meantime, since we still have a couple minutes, I just want to try to answer some remaining viewer questions. So Calder, we have a question from Bram Cordy. They asked, how do I find case bottoms that match the universal case design of the 60 HE?
That is tricky because we still need to go through a list of different bottom cases, to be honest. So what we did is we just took a couple of bottom cases that were let's say the guideline for the universal 60% case and layout and the way of installing it. But it's very, very, very difficult to make it compatible in all situations, because if you just have a component assembled on a different place somewhere on the PCB, and it might conflict somewhere on the case on the bottom because there's not enough space, the compatibility is gone. So in short, we are working on a list of bottom cases you would be able to fit it with. But in general, and how we've designed it, you should be able to fit it with any kind of 60% bottom case that's sold separately for 60% PCBAs and keyboards. And I think KBD fans, for example, have a plastic case. They also have aluminum cases. Those cases should just fit fine.
Very cool. And there are a lot of people asking about a Wooting mouse in the chat, and we have Budo specifically asking, what are other plans for more items on the store page after the 60 HE? Can you tell us anything about an upcoming keyboard or a Wooting mouse? There's a lot of interest in the mouse, it seems.
Yeah, so unfortunately, it was not a segue to a mouse. Unfortunately, guys, I'm so sorry. But you do know what I'll be focusing on when we're working on a mouse. It's just one of the things. I also have to say that with making a mouse, I would make a different mouse now than I would 3 years ago, except for the scroll wheel. But obviously, mouse is definitely something on our roadmap that we'd want to do eventually. It would fit also our, our assortment of products. But as usual, when we make something, we really want to look at, how can we actually add good value to this? And recently, for example, SteelSeries came out with a new mouse, and they have a new click system, which would increase the durability of the mouse clicks. And I admire that kind of effort that they put in. I hope also to take a similar route where we just really improve the mechanisms of a mouse much better, and not necessarily something as plain saying we're going to add analog input to the mouse. We will add analog input to the mouse if it makes sense to have it on the mouse and it actually helps you. But then something like using our whole effect technology in a mouse setup, that would be something that would be very feasible. But no Wooting mouse yet. I'm sorry, guys.
So I think we have time for one more question, but it's a yes or no question. Big Brain AFK wants to know if they can get a Wooting or in pink.
So when we were looking at doing the cases separate, doing more colorways was a big part of it. Right now, pink is definitely, it would be black, white, and I would say it would become pink. But then, others might not agree with me.
I like the pink, and the thing about other brands is that their pink keyboards always come at a premium. We joke about the pink tax, but it's a real thing, especially because a lot of these keyboards, you're expected to kind of buy them on sale, and the pink ones never go on sale. So there's definitely an opening in the market for.
I do understand
what I'm saying
why.
is I want a pink keyboard, but I can never justify the extra price.
Yeah, I do understand why, and we've noticed that with our Wooting Two Lekker edition. So that was a limited keyboard we made just 1,000 pieces of. And the thing you run into very fast is that, first of all, you need to spend quite a lot of time approving the color samples and all the colors. And then you have this part of if it's the whole product, if it's the same product, but then in like a pink version, it becomes a whole new SKU, a whole new type of product. Sometimes that would need to go through verifications again. Other cases it does not, meaning like FCC CE. It really depends on which manufacturer you work with, if they find it necessary or not. You don't really need to, but okay, it really depends. And then it's also that it's always for a limited market. So you also need to kind of predict, okay, how many would I kind of need to stock? And you're never going to sell as much as the black one. So in that way, it increases cost already very quickly, because as soon as you stop making the pink one, the manufacturer will tell you, okay, those thousands of pink cases that you have left as additions that you're not going to use anymore. You need to buy it now because you're going to stop producing this keyboard, and that makes limited colors very difficult, because sometimes you need to buy maybe 10,000 pieces in pink for that color, but you're only going to produce like 5,000 or something.
Send the leftover. You could send the rest of them to Michelle. She'll take the extra pink cases.
I'll become the gaming keyboard Avon. Start my own MLM.
I'll make a full pink for you, Michelle, and then if you can also sell them, that would be great. I got you covered. Don't worry.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, this has been a really good time. Thank you for everyone who's been watching and putting in questions. While you're at it, you can like us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and check out our site, of course. You can see our Basilisk V3 review, and we'll have the Wooting Two HE review coming up in time.
I'm super excited about the review.
Yeah, I bet you are. So, Calder, before you go, do you have any last words for the viewers, Calder, before we log off?
Yes, I do. If you're looking for a 60% keyboard that is going to make some real difference in how you play your games, but also in input latency, I haven't even shared anything about input latency. And there's a whole lot to share about input latency that you can check out on our website, where you can make significant differences in how you play the game and how you can get much faster input than you can get with other keyboards that go beyond, a faster polling rate that basically does nothing for you. Then you should definitely check out the Wooting Two HE, and you should check out the Wooting 60. 60 is launching on 28th of September, and Wooting Two HE is in pre-order, and we will try to have it in stock and when the batch arrives in November.
Awesome.
then
There's always
here's
so
the
much to
HE.
discuss and only
Oh,
so
yeah.
much time to discuss it. But where can we read what we weren't able to discuss today, Sharon?
Oh, so we don't have the Wooting Two HE review up yet, so stay tuned to the site. And the Razer Basilisk V3 is on tomshardware.com right now. And then obviously, like Calder said, check out Wooting for updates on all their products. And of course, join us next Thursday when we'll be back with more of the Tom's Hardware Show. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See you.